This is the Sales Bible Podcast, episode 218, Never Lose the Deal, an interview with Ganesh Tayi.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, the frightening and dangerous act of closing a deal. Or worse yet, not closing. Today we're going to meet a former fellow telecom expert, Ganesh Tayi. Ganesh has a long background from Motorola. I come from a long background at Bell Labs Lucent, and we both have seen B2B sales gone wrong. You know what I call the sideways deal. Ganesh is the author of the new book, Never Lose the Deal, 10 critical strategies every senior executive must know so they never lose the deal. And in this episode, Ganesh walks us through how deals go wrong, why they go wrong, and gives us 3 factors that we need to focus on when aligning our teams, analyzing the opportunity, and asking and truly understanding what the prospective client needs, hopes, and desires. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Ganesh. Are you ready to babble?
Absolutely. Yes, Pat.
Ganesh, you are the an author of a new book called Never Lose the Deal. That's right?
Absolutely, Pat. This is a book that I've recently published. And the reason I've done it is because I've seen over the last decade or so, with my own experience, having negotiated over $12 billion worth of deals, I've lost some along the way, as well as saved some in the last minute. And also, I was fortunate to be part of a deal desk where I was able to observe a lot of sales executives and sales pros putting in deals for approvals. And what fascinated me was that there are certain sales people that come in with their deals for approval. They get them approved all the time, and then they go and close them, right? So that made me take a pause and put together a framework and a principle and related strategies that basically outline what is it successful sales executives really need to do so that they ace the deal and do not give the common excuses that we keep hearing from most salespeople.
Well, let's talk about those, right? What are the unsuccessful salespeople? How do people commonly experience this idea of not being able to close a deal?
Yeah, so most of a typical or an average salesperson, right? What happens when they're negotiating a deal is they get wind of an opportunity, right? Either through a lead generation specialist on their team that provided it, or somebody contacts them cold and tells them that there's this opportunity for them to provide their product or service.
Yep.
And what they do is they maybe have a call or sit down with the one contact that has provided this information from their prospect, and they essentially jump right into the details of, okay, what are your requirements? When do you need this by, etc. And then the next step they do is go back to their team, and if this is something that requires them to work with their engineering team or operations team, they get the appropriate costs and the necessary paperwork that's required for them to put together the proposal, maybe get approvals from their manager or whoever the appropriate approval authority is, and then shoot off this proposal to the prospect contact that they have, right?
Okay. Now,
and this process is quite linear, unfortunately, and then they maybe have a call with him.
Whoa! We're going too fast here. Okay.
Okay.
So they've met with the customer, right? This is a B2B sale.
Right.
They've met with the customer and they've asked them what they wanted.
Right.
Then they go back, they shoot them a quote, they shoot them a proposal, right?
Exactly. So what you notice here in this typical pattern is that they've considered this as a sprint, right? So they're excited that they have this opportunity, and they think that whatever the customer is saying is right, instead of really assessing the needs of the customer and understanding the context of the customer and and more importantly, once without doing that, they jump into the thick and thin of putting together the proposal. Whereas,
So what you're saying is that they're so focused on providing a solution, and that the initial conversations, the discovery conversations that they're having with these prospects, that it's all about that as opposed to other stuff that maybe the company has, the issues the companies, other pains, other desires, maybe they're trying to obtain.
absolutely, absolutely. So what happens in a lot of situations is in B2B, right? Especially in B2B, there's multiple decision makers involved in any
Yep.
significant deal, right?
Yeah.
So what the salesperson should have done, and what I advocate in my book and the process that I see successful people have used, is they dig deeper in their first few conversations into trying to really understand the context around which the product or solution that they're providing would add value to their customer,
The
right?
context.
And then they look into the various customer decision makers and influencers, right, that are going to be involved in the deal, right? What is the decision making criteria that this particular customer has, as opposed to just running with a bunch of requirements that is provided by the procurement team or the technical team?
Right. So let's go through
So
some of
that,
those questions. Like you would maybe say, how do you guys make these kinds of decisions? What's the process that you use? Right?
yeah, so I think that's a very appropriate question to ask: is what is your decision making criteria, right? And also, I think at this stage you want to also ask another very important question, especially if you have a very differentiated, unique value proposition, Pat. You want to be able to ask how crucial is it to work with a company that offers that particular unique value proposition. For example, I come from the telecom world where like call latency is a big deal for a lot of customers, right? And for some it might not be. So you want to basically get that answer from them as to how crucial it is to work with a company that offers a call latency of less than 1 second, for example, right? So once they respond to that, then you want to ask why it is important for them, right? So you're asking, and again, this isn't intended to be an interrogation, but you're trying to basically uncover the root reasons behind why why your differentiation matters and how that impacts their business. That way, you can bring that information back to your internal teams, and when you're bringing together your proposal, you take into account all these factors that require for your proposal to be the winning proposal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what happens to these? So let's say you go down this path and you shoot them a proposal, and you haven't done this kind of due diligence. What happens
Hmm.
to the deal then? That's what I
So
that's
yeah,
what I've been
so
calling like sideways deals, right? Things that
yeah,
get stuck, and they're not saying yes
it,
and they're not
it,
saying
I,
no.
yeah, I think your term of sideway deals is one thing, and I typically refer to these when I work with my clients as like these chasing ghosts, right? Because they're essentially what ends up
Changing
happening is
goals. Is that what you said?
changing ghosts
Changing
because
ghosts.
they really don't exist. Because what happens, right? In a lot of companies, you have your quota, right, that you need to meet, and you're driven by your sales pipeline, right? So you're going back to your management every week and you're giving them updates on your pipeline. So
Yeah.
a lot of these deals that you basically had these superficial conversations on and have provided proposals on, they magically make it to your pipeline because you're measured on your sales pipeline, right?
Right. And
And
we could
especially,
talk for a long time, by the way, how
yeah.
compensation makes bad behaviors in salespeople.
Right, right. But again, I think what happens here is now you basically your company is counting on this deal to happen, and you send this proposal out to your customer. And typically, when you're dealing with one person at your customer, what they end up saying is, "Yeah, we'll review it with our team and we'll get back to you in a week, 2 weeks." And 2 weeks passes by, no update, right? And if you're lucky enough to have a good relationship with them,
This is so sad.
listen, I've seen this happen many
Oh,
times.
yeah.
It just pains me when I see this, and that's part of the reason why I put together this principle, which is almost like a step-by-step thing that a sales pro or even the sales manager and the directors and VPs that are managing these salespeople can use as a checklist and a guidepost, saying, "Have we done all these things in order for us to really feel good about this deal?"
So how many steps are there?
There are 10 10 strategies, but I boil it down to really three broad principles.
Can we talk about those? Let's walk through those three
Yeah.
principles.
So the first principle is all about really aligning, right? And the alignment is aligning both your own teams behind the deal as well as aligning the customer teams behind your proposal, right? The next one, the next A is about analyzing the opportunity and the deal, right? And the analyzing is all about making sure that you looked at the particular problem that your solution or your product is trying to solve, and have built a very solid return on investment model both for your customer as well as yourself. Because a
An
lot of times
investment model. An
a
investment.
return, a return on investment model or an ROI
Gotcha.
model.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's one aspect of the analyze. But also when it comes to analysis, you want to analyze your competition, right? A lot of times what I see sales executives doing is, yeah, they think they know their competition, but they know it at a very macro level, right? Not at that particular account or at that particular opportunity intersection. So trying to get all the intelligence behind who you're really competing with. And again, these are again fair questions to ask your points of contact within your customer organization, right? Who else are you bringing into this bid, or who else are you comparing us with? These are valid questions to ask as you build a relationship with your prospects. And then the other aspect of analyze is the big aspect is pricing, right? So how are you optimizing the mix of products and solutions that you're providing so that you're pricing it for it to be number one winning, but also number two really maximizing the profits for yourself and your company.
Yeah.
And last but not the least, deal incentives, right? So a lot of times when sales executives are putting together deals, they don't proactively think about incentives. It's in my opinion, it's very bad for you to come out and give discounts because the customer asked. But if you provide incentives within your proposal for various things, right? It could be for additional volume of purchases that they're buying if it's a product or a hardware purchase. If it's a service, if they sign up for like a 3-year worth of service, you proactively give them a certain incentive for signing up for a longer term. It could be bundling of appropriate additional value-added products, right? So there could be multiple buckets, but again, you got to think of all these elements and analyze before you even put together that first proposal and send it to your customer.
Incentives, not discounts.
Incentives, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Incentives, not discounts, because discounts are bad behaviors, right? And they erode into your profitability. But incentives help your customer do the right things and also help you become more efficient. Like one of the favorite incentives I recall using many times in my world when we were selling mobile telephones is, as you know, right, in telephony world, lead times are pretty long, right? So we had some parts that had lead times of 16 to 20 weeks, for instance, right? So if we did not get the demand forecast right, we were not in a position to serve the product with the customer at the right time. So one of the incentives that we used to give for customers that are willing to give us a long-term commitment on POs that are 16 weeks old, right? It's basically giving POs 4 months in advance. If we get those POs, we'd give them a X percentage discount. And why are we doing that? Because number one, it gives much more certainty to our supply chain. It will help us save costs in both negotiating the right lower costs from our suppliers, as well as save on the transportation cost because we know when the product needs to be delivered, right? That's an example of a incentive, not a discount, right?
Gotcha. That takes sense.
Yeah, so we talked about aligning and we talked about analyzing, and the third A is about asking, right? And the asking is in two fronts. One is you want to ask the right questions throughout the process, right? So at the very beginning, the kind of questions you want to ask are really questions that help you really understand the bigger picture of why this particular solution or why this customer is looking for this at this time. And then the next set of questions, like we talked about, is really understanding their decision-making criteria and dig into what is really important to them, right? So some of the one of the appropriate question to ask, for instance, is what are some of your must-haves, nice-to-haves, and maybes, right? So I think that way, I think it'll help you prioritize and focus on the things that matter the most to your customer versus going through your product-based view or your solution-based view.
What I really like about this is on this asking place is understanding too what's going on elsewhere in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you may have something that can actually provide a lot of a lot of quality or savings of time or something like that to them. But if they have bigger problems, like they're doing a build out project, or they're purchasing property, or they got a staffing thing going on, they're hiring, or they have a customer that that's talking about pulling out, and they're afraid they're going to put all their focus on that, and the likelihood of them buying from you, especially in the next 6 months, is very, very, very low. But if you don't know that,
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what ends up happening by asking these right questions is you will get a sense of their priorities for their organization, right? Because what ends up happening, in all fairness, with what most sales pros end up facing is the time pressures of meeting their quarterly quota, right? So their focus is, I need to close this opportunity
yeah,
this quarter, right? But unfortunately, the customer is not working on your quarterly timeline, right?
no,
So they're working on their own timelines, and I think getting to the truth of what their bigger picture and their priorities and the initiatives are, and how your solution kind of fits into that timeline and that priority, gives you that, releases that pressure of you trying to commit something to your organization that you can deliver in the quarter when your customer is not ready,
yep,
right? And having that misalignment will end up in all kinds of bad behaviors I've seen, where now coming quarter end, you're now trying to give discounts away to help them close the deals. And in some cases, maybe they'll bite on it, but in most cases, customers are not incentivized to agree to a particular product just because of discounts.
no. So if you could give our listeners a piece of advice that they could go and take action on today, what would that be? What's the one thing they could go work on?
So I think the biggest one I would say is really focus on your customer's decision making criteria, because once
Oh,
you
okay.
unravel and understand that and know who the key players there are, then you can actually align those your internal team to those decision making criteria, decision makers and influencers, right? As an example, for example, if you're working on a complex deal where you have an engineering aspect to it, an operations aspect to it, a IT or an information technology aspect to it, you want them to talk with the right people on your side, right? So as a salesperson, you are not you need not be the one that's playing all the instruments in the orchestra, right? You are the one that needs to be directing the various players in your team, much like a maestro is directing the various people that are playing different instruments in an orchestra, such a way that they're addressing the challenges that each one of these decision makers and influencers has.
Yep. What's the full title of your book?
It's called Never Lose the Deal. And it is for senior executives that are responsible for large sales contracts. And I typically work with companies that are closing six-figure deals to high seven-figure deals.
And you and I were talking before we got on the interview here that you wanted to give away a copy of the book, right?
Absolutely. For a limited time, I'm making a free copy of my book, downloadable version, available on my website. So if you could go to www.neverlosethedeal.com, and there is a tab for free book, and your readers are absolutely free to download it.
And I'll make sure and place that in the show notes. This is a great
Okay.
topic, Ganesh. This is one that's near and dear to me.
It is for me as well, and having seen a lot of people that I personally managed go through the pain of not meeting their sales quota, and you know this stat, right, Pat? More than 50% of the salespeople do not meet their quota, right? And the reason is they think of a particular opportunity as a sprint and not as as a marathon that they need to really prepare well for and proactively work on it before they just put a proposal out.
These things take time. B2B sales take time. There's a lot of people you got to talk to, a lot of personalities. Sometimes a company, sometimes the prospects don't know what they want.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I'll give you an example from my own experience, right? So once we were in this situation where the customer, one of our major customer, right, was asking for a certain set of products, right? This is few years back when the smartphones were not completely were just coming on. So as a company that is in the mobile industry, we saw the trend coming, right? That smartphones were no longer for like the high tier executives, but they were coming into the mid tiers. Whereas when the customer was requesting for the products, they were asking for a lot of what we used to call the feature phones, right? The ones that had those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 10, 9 buttons, right? Remember those? So they were still asking for those with additional features in the mid tiers, and we saw the trend coming, and we said, guys, you you should really be looking at smartphones in this tier, and we came up with a proposal that had a few feature phones in the low tiers and smartphones that were affordable in the mid tiers and then the high tiers. And there was another vendor that we were competing with that just did what the customer asked them to do. And you know what happened in the end? We ended up having not only won the deal, but also we ended up shipping a lot of volume of the product, making hundreds of millions of dollars of profit for our company. And on the other side, the company that bid and won for a few slots in the portfolio of these mid-tier phones, because there were a few people in the customer side that still believed that they needed one or two products, they ended up having a huge inventory problem because these products would not sell no matter what you did in the marketplace, because the marketplace has moved. So a lot of times the point is you got to listen to your customers, and also you got to educate them on what is happening in the marketplace, and really take this view of being a partner versus being a vendor. Because again, a lot of salespeople act with the mentality of a vendor, who typically gives what the customer is asking for. But in a B2B sale, especially in complex transactions, you need to be their trusted advisor and consultant, and even educate them on what they're not seeing and their blind spots, so that you not only become their trusted advisor, but also you become their go-to partner for going forward, that builds relationships and helps you take not only increase your profitability and market share, but also adds immense value to them.
Right. Well, Ganesh, thanks a bunch for visiting us here in Sales Babble. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you stopping by.
Absolutely, it's been my pleasure, Pat.
Whoosh. Like I said, this is one of my favorite topics. Because way too often we are too quick to pull the trigger on the pitch. We start asking some questions to discover what's going on with the prospect, and we hear one thing and we jump on that. It's like you're climbing a wall and you find a handhold and you grab that and you take the next one, and next thing you know, you've reached a dead end. That's what I call the sideways deal. We've talked about this in the past episodes. And in the show notes, I'm going to put some links in there so you can read that. The truth is, these people just aren't ready to buy. They got other things going on, or you're pitching the wrong thing because you haven't taken the time to fully and deeply understand what's going on in their lives, what they're really struggling with, and what they deeply desire. To connect with Ganesh and to get a copy of his free book, Never Lose the Deal, you can find that at neverlosethedeal.com. And like he said, there is a tab on there. And you can click on there and get a copy of that. And again, the show notes for this podcast is at www.salesbabble.com. To learn more about this topic, you can find other episodes in our back catalog. We have archives on prospecting, cold calling, presenting, closing, all things sales. It is there for you to find. If you enjoyed this podcast, please don't hesitate to share it with your friends. Podcasts are different than other mediums. The way people find them is through word of mouth. Either they've heard about them on another episode, or they've heard them on another podcast, or some friend has told them about it. And whatever app you're using right now on your podcast, forward it to a friend. Or send them an email to the link at salesbabble.com. We would love to help them out too. If you love this podcast, why don't you support us? Become a Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support Sales Babble, or you can donate to us too in not only dollars, but cryptocurrencies. I got my public key right at www.salesbabble.com/donate. And if you still want to do dollars, we can do a Venmo too. Thank you for listening to Sales Babble. You've been very generous with your time. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.